The UK has a great selection of theme parks, and in this video I'm going to compare two of my favourites. On one hand we have Blackpool Pleasure Beach, on the other hand we have Alton Towers. I'm going to break this down into various sections. For each section I will pick a winner, and at the end we will see who the overall winner is. The sections we are going to run through is ride lineup, food options, theming, price and tickets, events, accommodation, location, ride photos, mobile app, experiences, queue times, marketing and socials, getting around the park, and a public vote. Now this is based on my own experience. I have been at both parks many times. I've been a season pass holder at Blackpool for many years. I'd love to hear your thoughts if you disagree with me on any of these. And also, you may weigh some of these more importantly than others. For example, queue times might be more important to you than food options, or accommodation might be more important to you than the location. Okay, so for ride lineup, we have two very different offerings from the parks. Blackpool has a mixed heritage with a mix of multiple woody coasters, ranging right the way back to 100, 125 years old, right up to a modern steel coaster with Icon. On the opposite side at Alton Towers we have one woody, and it's not even, in fact it's their newest ride, and mostly steel coasters, but where Alton Towers excels is in world's firsts. So the world's first vertical drop, the world's first drop track, the world's first 14 inverting coaster. So they go for world's firsts and they have a very thrilling lineup. Now, to be honest, I kind of like both offerings. I think the mixed heritage at Blackpool, that kind of raucous woody versus that smooth steely, and Alton Towers thrill lineup is, they're both fantastic. So for this one, we're going to start with a draw. Next up, we have an important part of visiting a theme park, and that is what you're going to eat. Now again, both parks offer a selection of options. Both have all-you-can-eat pizza pasta buffet, roughly similar pricing. Both have sit-down restaurants. You've got coasters in Blackpool and you've got woodcutters in Alton Towers. They also have lots of kind of quick serve options and fast food sort of selection. I think the one place where I would say that Blackpool wins here is that, given its location and the fact that you are in the middle of Blackpool, you can leave the park and you have various options. So you have a McDonald's, you have a Witherspoons, you have various other options up and down the main strip. But in Alton Towers, you're in the middle of nowhere, so you're kind of stuck with what they offer. On the flip side of that though, Blackpool do not allow you to bring food in, or at least officially they don't. I don't think I've ever seen anyone sneak food in. Alton Towers don't seem to care, and you will see people snacking on their own stuff. So I think from that point of view, you're going to get a mixed bag. If you're looking for something to purchase on site, I would say Blackpool is your go-to because there are more options, given that you can leave the park. But if you want that kind of ability to take your own food and save a little bit of money, then Alton Towers would be the place to go. However, overall, for me personally, given the selection, I'm going to give the point to Blackpool. So when it comes to theming, neither of the two parks is on a par with like a Disney or a Universal, but one of them at least does do theming and the other one does not. Now you could argue one's an amusement park, one's a theme park, probably a fair argument, but if theming is an important element to you, then you're going to want to go to Alton Towers because they are at least attempting to put some theming into their rides. Obviously you have Smiler, which has the theming around the Ministry of Joy, Oblivion has all the theming, you know, the Don't Look Down, etc. Nemesis clearly has a lot of theming, and that is getting a lot of work done to it for the 2024 season. Whereas Blackpool, I mean, the Ghost Train's kind of themed, I suppose. You have Alice in Wonderland and Wallace and Gromit, which are themed, but realistically their main rides, their big coasters, theming isn't really a thing. So if theming is an important element to you, there's only one winner, and that is Alton Towers. Now of course, when you visit a park, you obviously need a ticket to get into that park, and both parks have various options. You have a day ticket, which is roughly similar price. It's 35 to 40, 50 quid, something like that in both parks. So for a day ticket, it's much of a muchness. They both have an annual pass offering. Blackpool has a simplified selection. Up until this year, they've only had one season pass, and it is all year round, there's no exclusion dates. And going forward, they're now going to have seasonal season passes. So they've got a summer, a spring, an autumn, but they will have kind of these sort of smaller ones, which will just be blocks of the year. Alton Towers does have a couple of different options for annual passes, and depending on which one you select, you will have different restrictions on what dates you can visit. So realistically, to get the full advantage of the annual pass, you really need to pay for the most expensive one to be able to go whenever you want. Now they obviously are part of the Merlin group, so they have a much bigger selection. You can have the Merlin pass as well as just the Alton Towers pass. The Blackpool pass for the last few years, and again for next year, also includes single day entry to 4 or 5 parks around Europe, which is great value if you are traveling. You can, you just rock up, show them your pass, and they will give you 1 day's free entry into the park. So kind of fairly similar offerings from both parks here. So this one is a draw. Over the last few years, we've seen an uprise in the number of themed events that you get from various theme parks around the country, not just Blackpool and Alton Towers. Blackpool is still kind of in its infancy with this one. They don't really have a huge selection. They've got Oktoberfest, they do Halloween, they've got a Christmas event, and that's pretty much it. Alton Towers, on the other hand, do the same. They have Oktoberfest, they have Halloween, they have Christmas, they had a Smiler Takeover, they had a pirate event, they do Mardi Gras. So they're doing a lot more events, and obviously given the size of the park, they can do it on a bigger scale. They've got a main stage, whereas Blackpool's just got the hub where the Wild Mouse used to be. So I think, although Blackpool may increase this over time, I think this one clearly goes to Alton Towers. They definitely do more and better events than Blackpool does. If you're someone like me and you don't live close to either of these parks, given that I live in Scotland, there is no theme park that is close to me. Blackpool is my nearest and it's 3 hours away. Then an important thing to consider is accommodation. Now both parks do offer accommodation. Alton Towers has more on-site accommodation. They have the Alton Towers Hotel, they have Splash Landings, they have CBeebies Hotel, they have the Stargazing Pods, they have the Enchanted Forest. So they have their own accommodation. They have a great selection, which includes themed rooms, obviously free parking, and you typically get access to the Crazy Golf if you stay on site. Blackpool, on the other hand, has 2 park accommodations. So you've got the Big Blue, which has been there for a long time, and then most recently you've got the Boulevard, which I've stayed in a few times. It's a beautiful hotel, probably the best in Blackpool, but it's not cheap. However, given where Blackpool is situated, you have a ridiculous number of options in terms of bed and breakfasts up and down Blackpool. So you can really afford to stay in Blackpool from as little as £20 a night right the way up to £200–300. Whereas in Alton Towers, if you want to stay near the park, you're pretty much on site, and it's a lot more expensive. Now you can stay in nearby villages, but it's not quite as on your doorstep. So if you needed to go and get something midday, you wouldn't just leave the park and pop into your hotel. You can do that in Blackpool. So for this one, Blackpool gets the point. The next thing we have is the location of the parks. Now obviously both parks are accessible by car, that is not an issue, but if you're somebody who doesn't have access to a car, doesn't drive, you're obviously reliant upon other means of transport. And I think this is where one park excels over the other, because although Alton Towers does have a bus service that runs quite infrequently, you could get a taxi there. It's not the easiest place to get to. It is, by design, in the middle of the woods. It's kind of isolated, which is one of its strengths. Whereas Blackpool is literally in the middle of the town. It has a train station just behind the park, obviously taxis. It just has more options for getting to it. So although location will vary depending on where you're coming from, in terms of your options to get to the park, Blackpool wins this one. I've mentioned this one in videos before, but whenever I visit a park, especially if I'm with my family, I enjoy getting the ride photos. We always post stupid faces. I just like having the memories. And obviously both parks do have a ride photo offering. Most of their major rides have photos, not all, in both parks. And they both have quite similar systems, to be honest. They're both self-service now. So in Alton Towers, it's within their mobile app. You get to the ride, it'll use GPS to work out which rides you're near. You pick the ride, you punch the number in, you add it to your list, and then you can choose to pay at the end of the day. So you could add them, and then at the end of the day, if you've only got 2 or 3 photos, you might go, not worth it, or you might go, I've got 20 photos and there's some real crackers in there, I'm going to pay the money. Blackpool is similar. It's not within their app, it is external, it's just through a website, but same kind of concept. So for this one, actually Blackpool has an extra photo option, which I never really understood. They've kind of got 2 different companies that do photos. So the ride photos, as I've just discussed, fairly straightforward. They do also have like a character meet and greet photo option with a different company, so they do have that as well. I don't think it's particularly popular, but in terms of ride photo offerings, this one's a draw. Mobile apps are becoming more and more of a thing around theme parks, and both Alton Towers and Blackpool now have an offering. Blackpool was a little late to the party, and to be honest, their app is very, very basic. It pretty much just shows you ride times. You can book Enzo, their kind of spinning seats on the back of Icon, and you can see your tickets in it. That's about it. Alton Towers on the other side has a much more kind of advanced app. It has directions, so given the size of the park, if you're not familiar with it or you're just not sure where things are, then you can get directions around the park. As I mentioned earlier, you get your ride photos in the app, you get queue times. I think you can buy experiences and tickets, not experiences, sorry, like Fast Track, etc. And just get some general information. So for this one, the Alton Towers app is clearly more mature than the Blackpool one, so this point goes to Alton Towers. One thing we've started to see more and more in recent years is theme parks offering unique experiences. Now that could be behind the scenes, off rides, walking some of the coasters, etc. Now many parks up and down the UK have started doing this, however Alton Towers hasn't yet, as far as I'm aware. Like other Mellon attractions, so Thorpe Park are doing it, but I've not seen any experiences from Alton Towers, whereas Blackpool has Walk the Woody, which I did this year. Card up there, or up there, that's one of the sides, and they have Walk the Big One, they have Walk the Big One XL. I think they're probably going to do a few new ones next year as well. So from an experiences point of view, currently this one goes to Blackpool, but I do hope that Alton Towers start to do some of these, because I think it'd be fantastic to get some behind the scenes on such a fantastic park. Another really important consideration when you visit a park is how much of their day you're going to spend stuck in a queue. Now, obviously queue times vary in both parks, depending on when you are. If you're there in peak season in the middle of the summer, then there's a high probability you're going to be stuck in queues in both parks. However, from my own experience, and I've been both peak season and kind of quiet periods, I think there's one park that tends to do better at this one. Alton Towers quite often has lengthy queues, either because of ride downtime, etc., or even just the fact some of the queue lines are actually just really long to walk through. So 13 and Rita do have little shortcuts that they can do, but they tend not to do them very often, so you end up having to walk an inordinate amount of distance just to get to the front of the queue. And if you look at something like Smiler, it's regularly got 1 hour plus queue times. And that's not to say you can't get a walk on, they obviously have a single rider as well. So Smiler can be quieter, but typically you'll find the queues in Alton Towers are quite high. On the flip side of that, Blackpool it's rare that I've seen a queue exceed an hour. It's not that I haven't seen it. For example, Valhalla this year when it reopened, I think it was up to 2 hours. I'm sure I stood 2 hours to go on Valhalla and then it broke down. But typically the ride times in Blackpool are maybe 20, 30 minutes, 40 minutes at push. You will see peaks, but it's very rare. So if shorter queue times and maximising the amount of rides you get in a day is important to you, obviously at Alton Towers you can have a quiet day if you go off season, and you can get a number of rides on, but typically Blackpool will have shorter queue times, so the point goes to Blackpool. Now when it comes to marketing and indeed social media, again we have two very different approaches from the parks. Clearly from a budget point of view, Alton Towers has a significantly higher budget than Blackpool does, but I think, and that shows in the marketing, right? So the marketing that you see, all the stuff we've had this year around Nemesis, Subterra, all that kind of stuff, the Phalanx, has been phenomenal. Like, it's been superb, they've done a fantastic job. Blackpool's marketing around Valhalla was underwhelming, let's say. Now I get that they had some issues there. They obviously closed the ride in 2019 expecting it to be a 1-year refit. COVID happened and it ended up taking them probably about 3, maybe even 4 years in total to get the ride reopened. So they were reluctant to announce anything because they weren't sure what was going on. I get that, but at the same time, they didn't really do much when it did launch. You know, there was very minimal marketing. Now social media, then there's an area where you don't need a significant budget to have a presence on social media, and yet Blackpool has been criticised quite heavily for this because, again, the Valhalla situation, there was no communication. You look at something like the removal of the wild mouse in 2016, 2017, it just closed at the end of the winter season and was removed by the next year. But there was no announcement, there was no get your final rides in. I get some of those things are maybe last minute and weren't planned. But to be fair to Blackpool Pleasure Beach, they are showing signs that they're starting to turn this around. They're reasonably active on TikTok these days, and they did have a kind of humorous post. There was some scaffolding up on the big ones, Lift Hill, and they made a joke around how they were going to extend it to maintain that tallest coaster in the UK, which of course is a title they will lose next year to Hyperia at Thorpe Park. But in general, from a marketing and social media point of view, Alton Towers clearly win this one. Once you're on site, you obviously have to get around the park, get from one ride to another. And again, this is where the two parks are completely different. On one hand, you have Alton Towers, which is a huge area with beautiful gardens and great scenery, but it does mean that everything is extremely spread out. And wouldn't be the first time that there's been ride issues or rides gone down. And if you've walked all the way over at one side of the park only to be told that ride is shut, you could then have quite a lengthy walk to get to another ride at the other side of the park. And this year, 2023, has been particularly bad because the Sky Ride has been offline all season, which has meant a lot of walking. On the flip side, Blackpool is a very compact site, and all the rides are pretty much on top of each other and interact very closely, so it takes 5 minutes to get from one side of the park to the other. Meaning if you do get to a ride and it's closed for any reason, it's not a big deal. There's another ride right next to it, and even if you have to go to the other side of the park, it doesn't take you very long. So in terms of getting around, although Alton Towers does technically have the option of the Sky Ride, and Blackpool is purely on foot, I'm going to give the point to Blackpool for this one because it's just really easy to get around. Last but not least, we have your views, your opinion, your vote. I put a poll up on YouTube a few days ago, and it's kind of flicked back and forward, but it is now a clear winner. Alton Towers is definitely the fan favourite amongst you guys. So that is another point to Alton Towers. So what does that mean in conclusion? Well, I mean, if you look at the raw numbers of the sections that I've broken this down into, Blackpool has 9 points and Alton Towers has 8, which on the face of it would mean Blackpool is the better park. As I said before, that is subjective. I'm sure many people disagree with that. Clearly the public vote says otherwise. And also, as I said earlier, different sections will be more important to everybody that's watching this video. So you may not care about the theming and you may not care about the food offering, but you might be much more interested in the ticket price and the queue times. You know, if you're there with young children, you want it to be reasonably cheap as a family and you want to get around quickly. Equally, you might be much more interested in that kind of immersive themed experience, in which case clearly Alton Towers is going to win. So realistically, they are both fantastic parks. They have very different demographics. They have a different approach to many things. But I would love to hear in the comments below what your thoughts are on all these sections and the parks in general. What you like, what you dislike, which one your favourite park is. I suspect Towers might get a few votes on that one. But yeah, let me know below. Drop this one a like, hit that subscribe button. I've been Chris, you've been watching Coaster Dad, and I'll see you in the next one. Adios.